So today I wanted to talk about how to learn ancient Greek. Now, this is really motivated by what would I have liked to know, or what would have been most useful for me to know before I had started. So, uh, after kind of crafting all the points that I think I wanted to know, I kind of came to the realization that actually what this presentation is about is how to learn hard things generally, with ancient Greek as the motivating example. So, in order to tackle this, we're going to need to confront some hard truths. So, first of all, your textbook, class, or teacher don't matter. Your desire to learn is the only thing that matters. So, we've all had the experience of being in a class with a incompetent teacher, or having to work with some book in school or something, or taking some kind of training through work that is just kind of useless. And so we had to pick up what we needed to know despite the material. So this is just to demonstrate that clearly your desire is the thing that's going to trump whatever material you happen to choose. Uh, the second hard truth is that to learn anything hard, the fundamental truth is that you're going to need to stick with it. And you have to figure out how you're going to do that if you want to succeed. So, um, the easiest way to do this is by going with the previous point, is by generating a lot of desire. If you really want to do something, then it's easy to stick with it because you want to do it more than you want to do other things. If you're really into a video game, you don't need to figure out how to stick with it. You want to do it more than you want to do the other things in your life, so you play it more. But desire isn't the only way to do it. The way that I actually did it, and the way that I've stuck with it so far, is by having a teacher. So I actually have a friend who's a PhD student in ancient history, and when I started asking him for resources and stuff, he actually offered to tutor me. And so I've been working with him, and that's made it way more easy. And when you think about school in general, we've all had the experience of a structured environment to learn things that you don't really want to learn that much but are good for you. So we know that it's important sometimes to be able to learn things that are going to help us in the long run, but in the short term, we just don't really want to do it that much. So finding somebody that's going to hold you accountable, and like a teacher or a tutor, paying them so you're actually invested, is a good way to do this one. Uh, and then third, your ability to experiment and find out what helps you achieve your goals is the most valuable skills. So uh, that's a terrible sentence, but kind of threw this together. The idea here is that uh, even when you have a teacher, even if you're paying them one on one, you have to take an active participation in figuring out what is working and what isn't working. Are you really stuck on some kind of concept, and just the explanation in the book, or the explanation your teacher's giving you doesn't really stick? Well, you need to figure out an experiment to figure out what works for you. So we're going to elaborate on each of these truths and go into a little bit more example. Then, if you stick around to the end, I will actually give some concrete tips for what I've done for ancient Greek. So first off, resources aren't important. So, uh, the key thing that I've come to realize is that you will learn more Greek by attempting every exercise in the worst textbook than you will by watching this, or really most any other video. Um, uh, just sitting down and actually working at it, engaging with the material, and trying to understand it is going to be a much better use of your time than passively consuming, or even passively like reading any kind of explanation. You can understand a new grammatical concept or a vocab, but until you've seen it how it's actually used in some actual Greek, it's not really going to be useful. Second, you can't even evaluate a resource until you've tried them. You can try to go to all these different people on YouTube, people on the internet, ask, oh, what is the best textbook for this? Oh, what if I want to do this method? What's the best way to do it? And fundamentally, you're just going off of whatever somebody else happened to use, whatever somebody else happened to like, and they might be right or they might be wrong. But fundamentally, you can't evaluate it until you actually try it for yourself. So uh, the key thing is to find something and then just start using it. And if you realize pretty soon this isn't the thing that's going to help you, then you can find another one, and you keep iterating until you make some progress. And then lastly, this kind of leads to this last point. After using a crappy textbook, you will actually value a good textbook. So if you started off with the best resource, you wouldn't even necessarily notice all the things that it's doing for you, all the best parts about it, and thus you might not be as likely to value it or to get as much out of it. Versus if you started with a crappy textbook, then it'll be immediately apparent, and you'll realize like, oh, there's so much gold here, and I can work through this. So I've had a few explanations in the textbook that my tutor has had me working through, and they haven't been very good. But that doesn't really mean that I'm constrained to that. I've found other textbooks. I've found other explanations. I've looked for other resources. So the key thing is you have the resources available to you these days, and just starting with one, sticking with it for a while, actually putting in the work, that's going to get you way more than spending more hours looking at these resources, which was definitely one of the things that I find is easier to do for me than to actually sit down and start learning. So the next thing, hard things take time. So Greek is hard, and there's a huge amount to learn. Once you realize how many forms and how many uh, different ways any given word is used, you realize that not only do you have to learn all the vocabulary, learn all the grammatical forms, and learn how they're used, you're just going to need to read a ton. You're going to need to see a ton of examples. You're going to need to work through them. You're going to need to struggle with it. And all of this, like, you can't really do this in a short amount of time. There's no, oh, get fluent really quickly. You can, of course, take less time than some other person for a task. And that's about the intensity with which you're studying, with which you're trying to learn. If you spend 1 hour per week versus if you spend 80 hours per week, chances are the 80-hour per week person is going to get further. But this doesn't stop the fact that your brain is only going to be able to learn so many vocab words a day. It's only going to be able to memorize so many forms. It's only going to be able to read so many words. So it's going to take a lot of time before you get comfortable with this. So no matter what you have to do is you have to figure out how you're going to keep going and how, so that you will eventually learn it. Like I said before, I think the two main approaches here are generating desire. So you just imagine, oh, how great will it be once I've actually learned this, or think about all the books I'm going to be able to read in their original Greek. Or maybe even, oh, think about how much more deeply, if you're, let's say you're trying to learn ancient Greek to study the Bible, think about how much more deeply I'm going to understand the Word of God or my faith. So I think all these things are ways to generate the desire to keep going and to keep just putting in the consistent work. And then the other side of it is I don't think these are mutually exclusive approaches, but I think it's also very useful to have somebody that keeps you accountable and helps you, gives you some structure. Make sure you're meeting a couple times a week to go through some readings together to fill in any gaps that you have. I've found that incredibly valuable, and that's how I plan to learn a lot more hard things in the future, is by finding somebody and working with them to learn it. So lastly, we have the true method of knowledge is experiment. So you have to try out any given method for yourself. So there's all these different ways of learning, all these different textbooks, philosophies, pedagogies around how you're going to best learn a language. And fundamentally, you shouldn't take anything as gospel until you've tried it for yourself. Put in a few weeks trying a given method and see if it works. Put in a few months, put in a few years. Now, I'm not at that point yet, but I know now that this is what I need to do. If I want to evaluate something, I should be trying it out and seeing it for myself. Now, not only this, but if I get stuck, like when I was first starting out in those first few weeks, I was doing readings and I realized, like, wow, I just don't know the vocabulary, and that's holding me back. Like, even if I memorize all my grammatical forms, it's not going to help me if I don't know any words. I have to stop and look up every single word in order to figure out what the sentence is even saying. So, uh, I think then I started experimenting with other methods, and I added in spaced repetition in order to learn vocab words, and then that problem was solved. As long as I keep up learning new vocab and reviewing my old vocab, I can, even if I don't recognize certain grammatical forms and stuff, I can usually get the meaning of sentences despite that. I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but I think that's important to bring up. So, everyone's coming from a different starting point. So, what somebody else's path may or may not work for you. So, just because somebody had great success or I had great success with spaced repetition doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the best thing for you. You need to experiment and you need to try for yourself to see what's working and what's not working. There's no reason to exclude something or exclude an approach if you haven't tried it. The only reason to do it is if you think that the cost is too significant. But even then, you have to be satisfied knowing that, like, oh, I'm okay even if that is the best approach for me because I'm not going to do it. I've kind of come down to that for memorizing some of my like noun forms, where I know I should just be memorizing, writing it out in a notebook every single form in order to memorize it. But and there's still time, so I still probably will do this because I still sometimes forget which forms are which or fail to recognize the genitive or the dative in some cases. So it's not to say that I won't, but I realize that it's just really hard for me to sit down to do this. So I would much rather sit down and work through some sentences, work through a passage, and actually try to read versus memorizing the forms. So that's just a little tidbit. And then lastly, just don't give up and keep going. If you keep experimenting, keep trying, you're eventually going to figure out, oh, this works for me, this doesn't work for me. I like doing this, I don't like doing this. And really, that's the whole point of this. You shouldn't be learning ancient Greek because somebody else tells you to. You should figure out why you want to learn it and then figure out what is going to work for you, what keeps you the most motivated in order to keep going. So, now, here are some little tips and tricks that, because I figure this is what people want and also would have been useful for me. So, pick a teacher and use whatever book they use. I think having the structure of an actual teacher and then whatever material they like to teach or how they like to teach, because fundamentally, if they've taught somebody this before, they have way more context on how to present different things or how to teach this specific book in this what order, what things to skip, what things to like add more context to, what explanations are good, what explanations are bad. So pick a teacher and use whatever they use, at least to start. I'm planning on going through other grammar textbooks after, well, I'm actually basically done with the first textbook that my teacher had me using. So, but I'm planning on, when I do grammar review, using another textbook that I slightly prefer some of the explanations for. And this is fine. Know that you're never going to stop learning, you're never going to stop reviewing, like, until you've achieved your goal of actually learning ancient Greek. So second, I talked about this before, but use Anki, use spaced repetition software. Create your flashcards for learning vocab. It's just the most efficient way to do it. I end up spending usually less than 10 minutes a day. I have definitely hundreds. I'm probably getting close to over 1,000 words, and yeah, this just made it so that reading and reading sentences went from being just a constant struggle of looking up words to and figuring out what the words are, um, to just, oh, I can actually just read a ton of sentences. And that's got it's a huge confidence booster once you're able to do that. The next big thing is context is king. When you're actually reading Greek, you should be trying to understand what is the meaning, right? So I personally find that if I know my vocabulary and I can get a lot of the vocab, even if I'm missing a grammar concept or forgetting a detail of what this might mean, just by knowing, oh, the context, this is a passage from Xenophon, or this is a passage from Thucydides or Herodotus, you can kind of get like, oh, this is from this time. This is probably the things that they're talking about, and this is what the story has been doing so far, you know? If you're reading a passage, isolated sentences are always harder because you have less context. So, this is all to say that if you're actually trying to get meaning from the language rather than trying to understand every grammatical piece of it, which is also a good goal, but if you just want the broader meaning, this can help keep this at the forefront, because that broader meaning is then going to make it way easier to understand, oh, how then are these grammatical constructs actually used? There's plenty of cases where I read a sentence and I know, oh, this must be saying this, but I don't know how it's saying that. And then usually I end up talking to my teacher, or I go back and review different grammatical concepts, and then I'm like, oh yes, that's actually this grammatical concept. So always remember that context is king in language. These last three are really just resources. I found that ChatGPT is actually pretty good at using words, but remember, you have to always double check what it tells you. There are plenty of times where I asked it, in this sentence, what does this word mean? And it was just completely wrong. Or you ask it, oh, what form is this noun in? What declension is this? And it gets it right some of the time, but not a lot of the time. But as a counterexample to that, there's been plenty of times where I've been able to figure out what is the word that I need to actually look up in my middle little or my lexicon, or down there you'll see Logeion, which is an online lexicon where you can type in Greek words and you can find out what they mean and how they're used and everything. But sometimes those lexicons, they give the words in their singular nominative form, or for verbs, it's just in their present active first person form. So if you then see a passive aorist form for some weird strong aorist verb, you might have a hard time understanding what is the actual word that I'm looking up in my lexicon. So here ChatGPT has been able to help me, because even when it gets it wrong, I can usually say, hey, I don't think that's the word. What other words do you think it might be? And then usually that can help get me unstuck. So the Perseus Collection, this is just online collection of a ton of Greek, a ton of Greek works, and they're interactive, so you can click on any single word in any single work, and it'll take you and it'll tell you exactly what form it is and the definition, and you can look it up in a bunch of different lexicons. This is less helpful when you're working through exercises from a textbook, but I make use of this already when I'm just trying to work through some readings that I want to see. So, and then Logeion, like I said, is an online lexicon. So anyway, that's all I got. Hopefully this is useful to you, and be sure to leave any comments if you have any questions. Happy to make more follow-on videos to answer any more questions or to give any more tips. All right, thanks, bye.